Sometimes it's helpful to have a PowerPoint presentation when you have visuals that you want to present to the group. This is an example of a PowerPoint that I used for the Recipes for Success program at Wabano Center for Aboriginal Health. This presentation was on protein, and I started by going over the Canada Food Guide. You can see in the Canada Food Guide that protein is in this red rainbow, but this specific population is an Aboriginal group, so I wanted to address that there are differences between the Aboriginal food guide that they published. Here there's a circular shape, and you can see that there's lean sources of protein, wild game, fish, seafoods, eggs, and beans. Whereas in the other suggestion, there was beans was the largest, and fish, they had chicken, tofu, and other seeds and nuts. Then I talked to the group about what a portion size of protein would be recommended. Again, it's down here on the bottom in the red. We have lean meats and protein, fish, chicken, eggs. So I told them that one serving of protein would be 2 eggs. It would be 75 grams of cooked lean game. And I held up the palm of my hand and showed them that it may be easier to look at the palm of your hand for a serving of protein. And it's recommended to get 2 servings per day for females and 3 for males. This is Canada's MyPlate. They recommend half of your plate be filled with vegetables, a quarter of your plate be filled with meat and alternatives, and then a quarter filled with whole grains. Another way to use this illustration is also to compare it to the palm of your hand. So that quarter of the plate is also the same size as the palm of your hand. So we're talking about portion sizes. Then I opened it up to some group discussion. I asked, why do we need protein? What happens if we don't get enough protein? And what happens if we eat too much protein? I use this as a way of informally assessing some beliefs and attitudes towards protein. And then on the next slide, I answered the questions, and I discussed the function of protein and what happens if we get too much or too little. I wanted to emphasize that there are more than just meat sources of protein. So you can look to meat and fish and cheese and eggs, which is what many people commonly think of when they think of protein. But I also wanted to point out that seeds and nuts are good sources, and you do get some protein from vegetables. Not all proteins are created equal. There are animal sources and there are plant sources, and the difference between the two is animal sources are usually complete, plant sources are usually incomplete. That means that you need to combine a variety of plants to make a whole complete protein. So we discussed about different vegetables or grains and legumes that you could combine to make a complete protein and what that looked like. On this slide, I talked about what meat sources looked like that our ancestors consumed. How is our food different when they were eating protein to what it looks like now? So they not only are these sources of protein found in the wild, and they eat whatever they find in the wild, but I asked how these protein sources were obtained. So we the ancestors would hunt for these sources of protein, which would increase activity level. So let's talk about how how this how this bird was shot, and how that bird might be eaten today, and how it was hunted today compared to back then. I also talked about how our ancestors would use the entire animal. They wouldn't throw away the organs. They would incorporate those into meals. They would use the bones to make uh, stock or soups, and there's a lot of beneficial nutrients in these parts. So there would be calcium in the fish head and lots of iron in the liver. And we talked about why we don't consume these foods as readily today. Then I asked them to think about what meats look like that they eat on a daily basis, and I asked them to think about the differences. How is a piece of sandwich meat prepared? What did the animal go through before it got to your plate? What ingredients were combined with that piece of meat? Is that what our ancestors ate, or how is it different? And we talked about fast food. What kind of food additives are added to meat, and how does that impact us? Here's an illustration of how animals are raised. They can be raised in fields of grass, and we like to think that that's how they're raised. But a lot of times they are raised in feedlots or pens and mass produced because there's such a high demand, and the producers are trying to keep costs low. So how does this living environment impact the food that we eat? How does it impact the nutrition of the food that we eat? Those were things that we talked about. Then we talked about what foods the animals that we eat also eat. So I asked them what they thought cows eat. And the responses were mixed. A lot of them didn't know that cows are supposed to only eat grass, but we talked about how cows have always eaten grass. That's what their main food source was, and we've introduced corn to the diet to fatten them up. So what does that do? Here's a picture of grass-fed meat compared to corn-fed meat. And we talked about how the grass-fed meat is higher in antioxidants, lower in fat, and you can actually see a difference in the color and the amount of fat in the meat. So, going back to the last slide, I wasn't introducing this topic to intimidate anyone or make them feel belittled for choosing a certain type of meat or choosing choosing to eat anything in particular. I was really bringing up these points so they're aware of the difference, so they know why red meat isn't necessarily promoted in the healthy food guide as one of the, beef isn't necessarily promoted as one of the healthy protein choices, but yet their ancestors may have eaten a lot of red meats. So what is the difference between the two, and why is it they but why is it that they may choose to vary protein sources in their diet? So goals moving forward, variety is a very big one. If we rely too much on one source of protein, you may not get the benefits of the other sources of protein that you're not consuming. We saw that our modern day beef selection may be high in saturated fat, and there are other types of protein like legumes and nuts and that have different fats that or are low in fat that may be healthier for us. So we're trying to increase variety and balance and avoid processing in our foods because we've talked about how when we process our foods, we add things that our bodies may not be used to, and we may take out things that are beneficial to us. Thank you for listening to my presentation.